Let me ask you something real quick. Have you ever met someone who seems completely okay on their own? They enjoy company, they love deeply, they care a lot, but somehow they don't need anyone to feel whole. They don't panic when texts go unanswered. They don't fall apart when plans change. They don't beg for validation or chase approval. And instead of making you feel distant, their calm confidence actually pulls you in. Those people aren't cold. They're not detached. They're emotionally independent. And once you understand the psychology behind them, a lot of things suddenly make sense about them, and maybe about you too. Emotionally independent people aren't born that way. No one comes into the world already knowing how to self-soothe, set boundaries, and stay grounded when emotions hit hard. Emotional independence is built slowly, quietly, often through uncomfortable lessons that force someone to learn how to stand on their own emotional feet. And that's what makes it so fascinating, because emotional independence isn't about being strong all the time. It's about being stable, even when things feel uncertain. Here's the first thing most people get wrong. Emotionally independent people still feel deeply. They get attached. They get hurt. They feel joy, disappointment, excitement, fear, just like everyone else. The difference is not in what they feel, but in who they rely on to process those feelings. When something goes wrong, they don't immediately look outside themselves for rescue. They don't need someone else to fix their emotions. They turn inward first. If an emotionally independent person has a bad day, they don't need 5 people to reassure them that they're still lovable. They might talk about it later, sure, but first, they sit with it. They ask themselves what they're actually feeling. They let the emotion exist without turning it into a crisis. That ability alone changes everything. Think about how many problems in relationships start with emotional dependence. One person feels anxious, insecure, or unsure, and instead of handling those feelings internally, they hand them to someone else, like a fragile package, and say, "Please hold this for me." That creates pressure. Emotionally independent people don't do that. They don't expect someone else to regulate their emotional world. And no, that doesn't mean they don't value connection. In fact, they often value it more. Because when you don't need someone to survive emotionally, you choose them because you genuinely want them. Love becomes a choice, not a lifeline. One of the most noticeable traits of emotionally independent people is how they handle loneliness. Most people treat loneliness like an emergency, a signal that something is wrong, a feeling to escape as fast as possible through relationships, distractions, or constant noise. Emotionally independent people see loneliness differently. They don't romanticize it, but they don't fear it either. They understand that being alone doesn't automatically mean being unloved. They know the difference between solitude and abandonment. So when they're alone, they don't spiral into thoughts like, "What's wrong with me?" or "Why doesn't anyone want me?" Instead, they think, "This is a quiet moment. I can handle this." And here's the funny part. Because they're comfortable being alone, they're often the people others want to be around. There's no desperation, no clinging, no unspoken demand that says, "Please fill this empty space inside me." Their presence feels light, safe, refreshing. Emotionally independent people also have a unique relationship with approval. They like being appreciated, who doesn't? But they don't depend on it. If someone disagrees with them, it doesn't shatter their self-worth. If someone doesn't like them, they don't immediately assume they need to change who they are. That's because their self-esteem is internally anchored. It doesn't rise and fall based on other people's reactions. They don't constantly scan rooms for validation. They don't measure their worth by how useful, attractive, or agreeable they are to others. This doesn't make them arrogant. It makes them grounded. They can listen to feedback without collapsing. They can accept compliments without clinging to them. And they can walk away from situations that drain them, even if it means disappointing someone. One of the most misunderstood aspects of emotional independence is boundaries. Emotionally independent people are not rude. They're not selfish. They're just clear. They know where they end and where others begin. And because of that, they don't overextend themselves trying to be everything for everyone. If they're tired, they say no. If something doesn't align with their values, they step back. If a relationship becomes emotionally unhealthy, they don't stay just to avoid being alone. They understand that peace is more valuable than approval. A lot of people struggle with boundaries because they're afraid of losing connection. Emotionally independent people understand something crucial. Real connection doesn't require self-abandonment. If a bond can only exist when they ignore their own needs, it's not a healthy bond to begin with. Now let's talk about how emotionally independent people handle relationships, because this is where things really stand out. They don't rush emotional intimacy. They don't confuse intensity with depth. They let connections develop naturally without forcing closeness to feel secure. They enjoy affection, but they don't panic when it fluctuates. They understand that people have moods, responsibilities, and inner worlds that don't always revolve around them. A delayed reply doesn't trigger a spiral. A quiet day doesn't feel like rejection. They don't read meaning into every small change in behavior. And when conflict happens, as it always does, they don't explode or shut down. They don't use emotional reactions as weapons. Instead of saying, "You made me feel this way," they're more likely to say, "Here's how I felt, and here's why." They take responsibility for their emotions without denying them. This ability comes from emotional self-awareness. Emotionally independent people spend time understanding themselves. They notice patterns in their reactions. They recognize triggers without being ruled by them. They ask themselves hard questions instead of avoiding discomfort. And yes, sometimes this self-awareness comes from painful experiences. Many emotionally independent people became that way because they had to. Maybe they learned early that not everyone would be emotionally available. Maybe they experienced inconsistency, disappointment, or emotional neglect. Over time, they realized that waiting for someone else to stabilize them was exhausting, so they learned how to do it themselves. But here's the twist. Emotional independence isn't about shutting people out. It's about letting them in without losing yourself. Emotionally independent people don't avoid vulnerability. They just don't overshare in hopes of being saved. They choose when and how to open up. They're selective with their energy. Not everyone gets access to their inner world, and that's intentional. They understand that emotional closeness should be built on trust, not urgency. Another thing you'll notice about emotionally independent people is how they deal with expectations. They don't expect others to mind read. They communicate their needs clearly, and when expectations aren't met, they don't immediately personalize it. If someone lets them down, they feel the disappointment, but they don't turn it into a story about their worth. They don't think, "This happened because I'm not enough." They think, "This happened because people are human." That mindset alone protects them from so much unnecessary pain. Emotionally independent people also have a strong sense of identity. Their interests, values, and goals don't disappear when they enter a relationship. They don't merge completely with another person's life and forget their own. They maintain hobbies, friendships, and dreams that exist outside of romantic or emotional bonds. This is why their relationships tend to feel balanced. There's space to breathe, space to grow, space to miss each other. And here's a little humor in all of this. Emotionally independent people are often the ones who forget to text back because they were genuinely busy living their lives, not playing games, not trying to create mystery, just living. And when they do respond, it's real, present, intentional. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Emotional independence can sometimes be mistaken for emotional distance, especially by people who are emotionally dependent. When someone is used to intense reassurance, constant contact, and emotional fusion, independence can feel threatening. But independence isn't withdrawal, it's stability. Emotionally independent people don't need constant emotional stimulation to feel connected. They're okay with silence, they're okay with space. They trust the bond without needing it to be constantly reinforced. That trust doesn't come from blind optimism, it comes from confidence in themselves. They know that even if a relationship ends, they'll survive emotionally. They'll grieve, yes, but they won't lose their sense of self. And that knowledge changes how they love. They love freely, not fearfully. They show up because they want to, not because they're afraid of being alone. Another fascinating aspect of emotional independence is how these people handle rejection. Rejection still hurts, but it doesn't define them. They don't beg to be chosen by someone who isn't aligned with them. They don't chase closure that someone else isn't willing to give. Instead, they accept reality as it is, not because it's easy, but because resisting it only creates more suffering. They understand that not every connection is meant to last forever, and that endings don't erase the value of what existed. Emotionally independent people also tend to have a strong internal dialogue. The way they talk to themselves matters. They don't constantly shame themselves for feeling too much or not enough. They practice self-compassion, even when they fall short of their own expectations. When they mess up, they don't spiral into self-hate. They reflect, they adjust, they move forward. This inner relationship is the foundation of everything else. Because when you know how to support yourself emotionally, you stop looking for someone else to complete you. You stop outsourcing your worth. Now, here's the part that often surprises people. Emotional independence doesn't mean you never need anyone. It means you don't need someone to be okay, but you still deeply value connection. Emotionally independent people ask for help when they truly need it. They just don't confuse help with dependence. They know the difference between sharing emotions and handing responsibility for those emotions to someone else. And that difference creates healthier dynamics everywhere, in friendships, family relationships, and romantic connections. If you're listening to this and wondering whether emotional independence is something you can develop, the answer is yes. It's not a personality trait reserved for a few lucky people. It's a skill set, one that starts with learning how to sit with your emotions without immediately reacting. It starts with noticing when you're seeking validation instead of understanding yourself. It grows when you learn to self-soothe, set boundaries, and tolerate discomfort without running from it. And no, it doesn't happen overnight. Emotional independence is built in small moments. Choosing not to over-explain, choosing not to chase, choosing not to abandon yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. Over time, those choices add up. The psychology of emotionally independent people isn't about being strong all the time. It's about being steady. It's about knowing that your emotions matter, but they don't control you. It's about understanding that connection is beautiful, but self-connection comes first. And maybe the most powerful part of emotional independence is this. When you no longer need someone to complete you, you finally have the freedom to truly love them. Not from fear, not from lack, but from choice. And that kind of love, that's where everything changes.